Hi, we're here at Supercomputing 09 in Portland, Oregon, and I have the opportunity to talk with James Pang and Lawrence Liu of Platform Computing about some of the interesting things they're doing this year with platform software. So I'll turn it over, James, and you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what's going on in Platform.
So my name is James Pang. I'm the VP of Product Management at Platform, and the last while everybody's talking about cloud. Obviously, we're part of that trend. And with respect to cloud, what we're really talking about is how to bring application SL delivery and match that with the resource management, infrastructure management that we've that is the foundation of any kind of cloud. And that's really the driver, application and infrastructure management.
My name is Lawrence Liu, and I'm the business manager for Platform's cluster management product. And at the same time, I'm also the HPC community manager that drives Platform's open source initiatives.
Here's the big question, and I think actually the really interesting news is there is a concept floating around that I call Cluster 3.0, and that is the way clusters are now being run, and the cluster is more application driven than management driven. So Cluster 1.0 was really the stack of Red Hat CDs that you ran around and installed on a bunch of nodes and got your smallish cluster up and running and installed some additional software. And then Cluster 2.0 was where image-based systems such as ROX or Oscar and those types of packages were used to set up clusters, but it was in a very static fashion. And so once the OS was installed, that's what lived on the nodes, and they usually were run with one or maybe two applications. Now Cluster 3.0 has really untied the ropes that keep us hooked to specific operating systems and applications. So it allows the application to drive what actually gets installed and run on the node. So I'm going to let James elaborate on that a little bit and how Platform's offerings fit into that scheme.
Thanks. So I think that's a great way to describe a cluster 3.0, and that fundamentally what we're saying is that if you start from the lowest level at the infrastructure level, traditionally it's been very static. You know, once you install Linux, there Red Hat 4, Red Hat 5, it stays like that. But that's not good enough if you think you're really offering really software as a service to your internal users as a private application cloud, because different applications will have different infrastructure requirements. Some requires Windows, some requires SUSE, some requires Red Hat. And if you want to have a chance of breaking down these silos and consolidating into one environment, then you really need a infrastructure foundation that allow you to provision different images, right? To do things like dual boot or multi-boot between Linux and Windows, to reprovision a whole machine, right, based on images, or also introducing things like VMs, virtualization, and with things like Xen, KVM as being part of the OS, or Hyper-V as part of the OS, this becomes very much more convenient and much more accessible to our HPC community, that you can flip and change the personalities of infrastructure on demand. So that is the foundational part of what we see as the infrastructure management layer, and how that's evolved from being very static to much more heterogeneous and much more dynamic. But you need something to drive it, because as Doug mentioned, people don't buy clusters to manage it. People buy clusters to run applications, hopefully lots of applications. So that's where the layer and the integration with a smart workload manager, such as LSF, and then integrating one more layer up with MPI to have that granular scheduling and that granular task level awareness, and then one more layer up there with the application integrations, specific application integration with Fluent, accessible through self-service portal, or accessible through some kind of basically a application center. So that from an end user point of view, all they want to say, I want to run this application, and I need to run it and finish it by tomorrow. That's all they care. Another user say, I want to run this other application. I need to finish it by tonight, right? And so you bring this whole stack together. And that whole stack is why I like the way you describe it as Cluster 3.0. So application demand drives the workload manager, which in turn drives the provisioning of the infrastructure layer in order to serve the application demand. And all of this comes down to the net benefit being you can have many, many more applications sharing the same infrastructure. So that brings, you can now reduce things like cluster silos, cluster sprawl, and move them all into one system. And so that's a reduction in cost. At the same time, you are delivering things much, much more quickly now because it is automated, end-to-end automation. And that's, I think, is a great way you describe it, kind of Cluster 3.0.
I think it's a great concept because, you know, it's really application-driven clustering. So if your application, and basically there's lots of different applications that have a very specific dependency, software stack dependency. Sometimes OS version is very specific, Linux version, or totally Windows or something of that nature. And so rather than trying to rebuild your cluster every time you want to run a new application, this is really more of a hardware virtualization play than it is, you know, a static clustering methodology that we're all used to.